What's happening? Happy Monday to all of you. Happy St. Patty's Day to those who celebrate, enjoying themselves over the weekend, maybe enjoying themselves today, maybe enjoying themselves tonight. This is Everything Pats, a New England Patriots podcast with Nick Cattles. Glad you could be here as always. We have a pod coming up on Wednesday, by the way, at 3 p.m. right here on YouTube, but no podcast on Friday, no stream on Friday. I'm going on vacation, so unless there's some gigantic news, Wednesday will be the last time you hear from me this week. So just keep that in mind, stick a pin in that, and now let's move forward because there's a lot to talk about. And let's begin with Tet McMillan. Tet McMillan, big-time wide receiver in this year's draft class. Many people wondering how fast Tet McMillan is. It's one of the biggest questions about Tet. How fast is he? He did not run at the combine. Many people thought he would not run at his pro day. We didn't think he was going to test at all. That was the expectation from some. Well, today, he ran at his pro day. And Tet McMillan, now, of course, this is a pro day, so it's unofficial. You have everybody with, stopwatches, and they're paying attention to the 40, and they might be a couple of tenths of a second late on the draw. They might be a couple of tenths of a second early on the draw. So take this for what it's worth. But people at Tet McMillan's pro day, the scouts there, according to a report, Tet McMillan ran between a 4.46 and a 4.53. So scouts had Tet McMillan as low as a 4.46 in the 40 today at his pro day. Other scouts had him clocked at 4.53. So somewhere between 4.46, 4.53. Let's just call it 4.5 flat, right? Let's just be reasonable here. And let's call it around a 4.5 flat 40 from Tet McMillan. That's faster than I anticipated. Many people would tell you that he looks like he plays in the low 4.5s. Some people were thinking he might run in the 4.6s if he ran. He might even touch a 4.7. The fact that he's right around a 4.5 in the 40, I think puts Tet McMillan right back into the conversation at number 4. He's on the radar. I would not put him above Travis Hunter. I would not put him above Abdul Carter, but he's in the conversation. He's one of those other players that you look at number 4 as a possibility for the Patriots. He's a Mike Vrabel prototype. When Vrabel took the job, he did an interview, I think it was on WEEI, and he was asked about wide receiver. And he really talked about the prototypical wide receiver that he looks for. And it feels like A.J. Brown, right? Because what Vrabel said was he likes size. He likes catch radius. Tet McMillan has a tremendous catch radius. Vrabel talked about somebody who can make contested catches. And everybody thinks that a contested catch is a 50-50 ball. It's not always a 50-50 ball. Making catches in traffic, making catches with good coverage, good man-to-man coverage. There are lots of different contested catches. Being able to haul in a catch in traffic in the red zone, for example. So Tet McMillan has a fantastic catch radius. He's good at contested catches, if not very good. He's explosive. A ton of 20-yard plus plays the last 2 years. Yak machine. He runs really good routes. And he is a weapon in the red zone. 6'4", 219 pounds. So with this 40 at his pro day, Tet McMillan is now back in the conversation. And we'll see how the next 4 or 5 weeks unfolds here as we get to the draft. But right now, you have to consider Tet McMillan as being one of the guys on your board if you're the Patriots and you're picking at 4. And if there's no Hunter and there's no Carter there at 4, he's got to be within the list of 3 or 4 guys that you're looking at. Will Campbell, right? Mason Graham. We've talked about some of these names. Maybe even Tyler Warren. And now you put Tet McMillan in that conversation. He's on the radar at number 4 after running that 40 at his pro day today. Speaking of wide receivers, we can now officially wipe off T. Higgins from the list. Another option gone. Patriots, of course, would be interested in T. Higgins if he got to free agency. That's not happening. T. Higgins agreed to a 4-year, $115 million deal with Cincy. The average per year on this contract is $28.75 million, which is less than what T would have received if he did hit free agency. I believe the Patriots would have been willing to pay T. Higgins at least $30 million a year, if not more than that. So the $28.75 million that he gets from Cincinnati is less than he would have gotten from his free agency, but it's more than he would have gotten from his franchise tag this year, which was right around $26 million. I'm surprised that T. Higgins is not going to get $30 million a year. But since he did have some of the leverage because of that franchise tag. What's also interesting about the T. Higgins contract, according to Jordan Schultz, who broke it last night, the first 2 years are guaranteed, and that means something. The guaranteed money has not been reported on. We don't know how much guaranteed money there actually is going to T. Higgins. The way that it was phrased by Jordan Schultz was that the first 2 years are guaranteed. But we don't know what that means. We have no clue what that means. So the first 2 years at his contract at $28.75 million, do you just double that and say he's around $57 million guaranteed? I don't know. Did he get a signing bonus? I have no idea. So it's interesting the way that this has been reported out. First 2 years guaranteed, but no money figure. So I don't know what the guarantees are for T. Higgins. But he's locked in Cincinnati. Looks like he's going to stay there. And so now you look at the wide receiver offseason so far. Chris Godwin stays in Tampa. DK Metcalf gets traded to Pittsburgh. Cooper Kupp, of course, over the weekend. He signs with the Seattle Seahawks. And now Higgins stays in Cincinnati. Is Kendrick Bourne right now your wide receiver one? You might say Pop Douglas. But, of course, as we know, Pop Douglas, slot guy, really going to be the number 3. Who's the number 1? If you had to play a football game tomorrow, and thankfully you don't, if you had to play a football game tomorrow, who's your number 1 receiver in that wide receiver room? You got a bunch of unknowns. Is it going to be Kendrick Bourne from last year, or is it going to be Kendrick Bourne from 2021 with Josh McDaniels? Jalen Polk, does he have a pulse this season? Javon Baker, can he get on the field? I like Pop a lot. I trust in Pop. He's good. Matt Collins is more of a 4, right, than a 3 or a 2. So right now you're kind of scrambling at wide receiver, which is why Tet McMillan is absolutely a part of the conversation at 4 after his 40-yard dash today at his pro day. Absolutely part of the conversation. Not telling you pick him, but he's on the radar. He's worth lumping in with some other people there at 4. But today's focus, I don't want to spend as much time talking about, wide receiver today. I want to talk about the offensive line, protecting Drake Maye. We all know the Patriots signed Morgan Moses. I'm happy with that signing. I think many of you are happy with the signing. After hearing from Morgan last week at that press conference, you're probably even happier with that signing. Certainly sounds like a leader. Is a legitimate NFL right tackle. So we all like the addition of Morgan Moses. But you still have Vidarian Lowe at left tackle. You still have questions at left guard. You still have questions at center, which we'll get to in a minute. But speaking of protecting Drake Maye, of course, if Drake Maye went down, right now, the guy that would replace him most likely is Joe Milton. Maybe he gets beat out by Joshua Dobbs to be the backup quarterback. But right now, you would give the edge to Milton just off natural talent. We have an update on Joe Milton. But before we get to that update, don't forget to help us out. Click that thumbs up as you watch us on YouTube. That helps us with the algorithm. More thumbs means more eyeballs. So don't forget to click that like button. Don't forget to click that thumbs up. Also, throw your comment in. How do you feel about Tet McMillan with this 40-yard dash today? Is he now part of the conversation at number 4? How do you feel about the wide receiver depth chart right now? Comments help us as well. So don't forget to like, don't forget to comment, and don't forget to subscribe. We are about 220 subscribers away from hitting our goal of 6,500 subscribers by the first round of the NFL draft that Thursday night. So don't forget to like, don't forget to comment, don't forget to subscribe. All right, before I get to the offensive line conversation, update on Joe Milton. Tony Grassi out there in Cleveland. He wrote today that the Patriots, according to sources closer to the situation, the Patriots are expected to ask for a 3rd-round pick to trade Joe Milton. Now, you might be wondering, who's Tony Grassi? He's been in Cleveland forever. And let's not forget who was in Cleveland just some years ago. Elliott Wolf. Now, I don't know if Grassi is talking to Elliott Wolf. I don't know if Wolf is talking to Grassi. But I do take this a little bit more seriously because Grassi's been in Cleveland forever, and Elliott Wolf was in Cleveland as the number 2 in the front office for a few years. So I would imagine Grassi has some kind of connection with Wolf, or has some kind of connection, if not directly to Wolf, then he knows somebody who knows Wolf. So I would not just throw this away as just another rumor. Grassi says Patriots expected to ask for a third-round pick. I would ask for a third-round pick if I wanted a fourth-round pick. That's usually how this works, right? So are the Patriots expected to ask for a third to trade Milton because they know they're not going to get a third, so they're overshooting, so to speak, so they can land at a fourth? I'm willing to trade Joe Milton for a third-round pick. I talked about it on a prior podcast. You can go back, check out the archives. I think we were called the Nick Cattle Show at that time, a couple months ago. I would trade Joe Milton for a third-round pick. I told you why a couple of months ago. Nothing has changed. I'd be willing to make that deal. I know some of you are against that. I'm okay. I'm okay with dealing Joe Milton for a third-round pick. Drake Maye is your future. But it's interesting because if the Patriots are expecting to ask for a third, that might mean they don't think they can get a third. They might think they can get a fourth. So we have to keep that in mind. JC Starhawk with a $20 super chat, 49ers fan who checks out the podcast regularly. Thank you, JC. Would you be interested in trading for Christian McCaffrey? I mean, we are getting rid of everything in San Francisco. Interesting that you traded Jordan Mason to Minnesota. I liked Jordan Mason when I did radio in Sacramento. I liked Jordan Mason then. I still like Jordan Mason. If I'm San Francisco, I'd be looking to deal McCaffrey. I'd be looking to deal Trent Williams. I'd be looking to deal George Kittle. I feel like they're not really picking a lane right now. And you got the Brock Purdy contract coming up. I would not trade for Christian McCaffrey if I were the Patriots because he's aging, injury history. Last year he was banged up, missed a lot of the season. I think there's some significant questions about whether or not McCaffrey is going to be capable of giving any team more than 14, 15 games in 2025. I'm not giving up assets for an aging running back. I would not be interested in that. I think Christian McCaffrey, JC, is more a move for a contending team, a team that feels like they might be one or two guys away, a la last year with Philadelphia going and spending the money on Saquon Barkley. I think that's the kind of team that would be interested in McCaffrey. And the other part I would say, JC, is it's difficult to trade Christian McCaffrey in this market because the running back depth in the draft is unbelievable. There are a ton of running backs in this draft that are going to make some noise. So for any team who's looking to add a running back, I would have to imagine most of them, not Minnesota, obviously, but I'd have to imagine that most of those teams looking for a running back are going to be looking at the draft and saying, we'll just draft our guy. You might even be able to get an undrafted free agent at that position with the depth this year. So I think that's what they're looking at. And that's what many teams are looking at. All right, let's talk offensive line. So Mark Daniels, over the past few days, he wrote this in Mass Live. The Patriots coveted Ronnie Stanley. We know that. Stanley decided to re-sign with Baltimore. Stanley said today he didn't really even get to the point of entertaining free agency because he wanted to stay in Baltimore. So that's done. We know it. The Patriots were also in on Dan Moore, according to Burt Breer, who signed a crazy contract in Tennessee for more than $20 million APY. Sources also told Mass Live that the Patriots were outbid for Jalen Moore, left tackle who went to the Kansas City Chiefs, former San Francisco 49er. Jalen Moore signed a 2-year, $30 million deal with Kansas City. So they wanted Stanley, never had a shot. They were interested in Dan Moore. Tennessee came over the top, a la Calvin Ridley, but even more egregious this time around. They were interested in Jalen Moore. They were, quote-unquote, outbid by Kansas City, 2 years, $30 million. Then you move to guard. A source told Mass Live the Patriots were also involved in Patrick McCarry, former guard, offensive lineman for the Ravens. McCarry signed a 3-year, $37.5 million deal with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Burt Breer reported the Patriots were also involved with free agent guard Will Freeze, who signed a 5-year, $88 million deal with Minnesota, and center Drew Dahlman, who signed a 3-year, $42 million contract with Chicago. I've got an issue with this, and I'm frustrated. I talked about this a little bit yesterday on 98.5 The Sports Hub. I'm frustrated. If you want to tell me that you got outbid for one offensive lineman, okay. If you want to tell me that one offensive lineman you were targeting decided to stay where he was, okay. But when you tell me you've been outbid on 5 or 6 guys, that's when I start getting frustrated, because all the reports that we had leading into free agency was that the Patriots were going to go heavy on the offensive line. We talked about the trenches, right? Over and over and over again, we talked about the trenches leading into free agency. The Patriots were going to build the inside out. And then you get to free agency, and you have signed Morgan Moses, which, again, everybody likes him, and you signed Wes Schweitzer. Those are your 2 offensive line additions. Meanwhile, you subtracted David Andrews. So we were expecting this team to spend big money on the offensive line. Instead, they spent big money on the defense, and they got outbid on a bunch of different offensive linemen that they were interested in. And that's what's aggravating and frustrating. The Patriots did not go out and sign guys. And some people might say, well, you didn't go out and sign the offensive linemen that, are out there because you might not have liked them. But that's not true. Because as we know from these reports, the Patriots were interested. They were interested in several offensive line free agents. So their interest, number one, tells you they're targeting those guys. Number two, the fact that they were interested in those players I just mentioned also tells us that the Patriots are not in love with what they currently have. If you're interested in Patrick McCarry, then you don't really believe that Layden Robinson is a starting left guard. You don't believe that Cole Strange is a starting left guard, right? Because if you believed in Robinson or Strange, you wouldn't even be looking at Patrick McCarry. If you were committed to Vidarian Lowe at left tackle, you would not be having conversations about Ronnie Stanley. You would not be having conversations about Jalen Moore or Dan Moore. The fact that you were interested in those players tells us that you don't believe that Vidarian Lowe is the answer at left tackle. Because if you felt that way, you wouldn't have been shopping. You go shopping because you don't like what you have in the house. Just like they went out and they shopped for Drew Dahlman. He ends up in Chicago. They released David Andrews. So even before releasing David Andrews, they were looking for a center, which tells you they're not especially in love with the idea of Ben Brown being their starting center. This is the problem. The fact that they were shopping for all of these offensive linemen tell us they're not happy with what they have at center, left guard, or left tackle. And then they failed to land any of the guys. They failed to land any of them. They got outbid on every single one. And that's frustrating. They had more cap space. They had more money at their disposal than any other team in the NFL. They could have outbid every team. They could have outbid Kansas City for Jalen Moore. They could have outbid Tennessee for Dan Moore. They could have outbid Chicago for Dan Dahlman. And they didn't. Drew Dahlman, sorry about that. They didn't. They didn't outbid anybody. They got beat. They got beat over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. They got outbid on every single guy. That's why I'm frustrated. It's not just about missing out on one dude. Ronnie Stanley, I can understand. Ronnie Stanley wanted to stay in Baltimore. But when you get outbid at every single stop, when you have told the entire world through leaks that you are dedicated and you are going to be committed to adding the offensive line help that you need, and then you get outbid for all of the offensive line help that you targeted, that's a massive fail. Last year in free agency, you didn't have the options that you had this year. You didn't have the options that you could have traded for, right? Joe Tooney got traded. Jonah Jackson got traded. So you not only swung and missed on the free agency market when you had the most money to spend and you told the entire world that that's what you wanted to spend the money on, you not only failed in free agency to this point, but you also didn't make any trades to bring in more talent. Now, there's plenty of time. We got 6 months until they kick the football off. This is not a lost cause. I said that yesterday on the radio. But this report from Mark Daniels should have every Patriots fan frustrated. They had their list of targets, and they decided not to go pay those targets as much money as it would have taken to bring them in. So what's next on the offensive line? Where do the Patriots go now? Talk about that in a minute. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy what we do. Helps us out, builds the community. I'm a one-man band, independent show. Need your help. Like, comment, subscribe. So here are some options. Obviously, Cam Robinson is still out there on the market. Left tackle, was traded to Minnesota last year. There are character questions about Cam Robinson. There are, apparently, I read in a report this weekend, football IQ questions about Cam Robinson. In last season was a down year. It was easily his worst season in the NFL. Mike Giardi reported that he had an injury, so that didn't help. But are the Patriots interested in Cam Robinson? According to Mark Daniels, they are. Mark Daniels writes that Cam Robinson, there is interest there with the Patriots, according to a source. So this is not a situation where the Patriots have completely ruled out Cam Robinson. There is some interest in Cam Robinson. Now, maybe Cam Robinson is asking for a ton of money and nobody's willing to pay him, and that's why he's still a free agent as we enter into week 2 of NFL free agency. But if you're interested in Cam Robinson, the million-dollar question, as we've learned this offseason again, is can you close the deal? Interest is one thing. Can you close the deal and bring in Cam Robinson? Because if I'm the Patriots, I'm trying hard to sign Cam Robinson. Now, I'm not going to give him, $20 million guaranteed. I'm not going to go crazy with the offer. But if I could get Cam Robinson for 1 year, $10 million guaranteed, I'm doing that deal. I'm absolutely doing that deal. And I know that it can backfire. I know he might get injured. I know his football IQ is questionable. His character's questionable. I want to bring in somebody who has experience and who has played left tackle at a reasonable level, an average to above average level. And Cam Robinson has done that. He didn't do it last year, but he has done that in his NFL career. So I'd be willing to give him $10 million guaranteed for 2025. I'd be willing to give Cam Robinson $15 million guaranteed if it's a 2-year deal. But I'm interested. Give Vidarian Lowe some competition. Give him some competition. If Vidarian Lowe beats out Cam Robinson, great. Then he beats out Cam Robinson. And yes, you might have egg on your face because you paid Cam Robinson $10 million guaranteed. I couldn't care less, because what if Cam Robinson beats out Vidarian Lowe? Now you have a guy who's played above average football at the left tackle position at the NFL level. Not a bad deal, right? And you have Vidarian Lowe to back him up. You've got some good depth there. And also, if you sign Cam Robinson, you might not feel the urge to reach for somebody like Will Campbell if you're unsure he's a left tackle. You might not have to reach for an Armand Membu when Membu's played nothing but right tackle at college. And even though he has the athletic profile to kick to the left side, we don't know if he can play the left side. So it gives you some insurance. It frees you up in the draft. So yes, I would sign Cam Robinson. $10 million guaranteed for a year, $15 million guaranteed for 2 years. I'd be interested if you can get him for that deal. Now, I don't know what he's asking for, but that's where I would draw the line. And I would 100% be interested bringing him in. If you don't get Cam Robinson, I'll bring you back to a name I had during my offseason plan when we did the podcast a couple weeks ago. I'd look at Jedrick Wills. And yes, Jedrick Wills has character questions. He has injury questions. But I think you could get Jedrick Wills for a somewhat cheap amount of money. And if he doesn't work out, then you move on from him. But I'm trying to build depth. I want NFL offensive linemen on this roster. And whoever you bring in is going to have questions. Jalen Moore was not a full-time guy in San Francisco. Kansas City paid him. Dan Moore wasn't great in Pittsburgh. Tennessee paid him like more than $20 million a year. Even Ronnie Stanley, who was everybody's favorite at left tackle this free agency, he's 31 years old and has a long history of injuries. He played every game last year, but he's had a long injury history. So there's going to be nobody there that's going to be perfect. You have to be willing to accept the flaws. You ever hear bird in the hand? Yeah, I want the bird in the hand before I get to the draft. Even if there are questions about the bird. How about guard? I'll bring up a name that I brought up. Was part of my plan. Here's what I would do. I'd be interested in Tevin Jenkins. Tevin Jenkins, guard, played for Chicago since he was drafted. And guess what? There are questions about Tevin Jenkins, just like there are questions about everybody else that we've talked about. You're not going to get a flawless player. If Tevin Jenkins was flawless, he'd still be in Chicago. There are legitimate injury questions. Ben Johnson, new head coach in Chicago, said thanks, but no thanks. And Jenkins is reportedly taking a visit today in Seattle with the Seahawks. Here's what Brandon Thorne wrote about Jenkins. Brandon Thorne's one of the best when it comes to offensive line breakdowns. It's like trench warfare is what he does. Here's what he wrote about Jenkins. Jenkins has been a bit of an enigma over the first 4 years of his career, thanks largely to an inability to stay on the field. Stems from a back surgery that ended his rookie season. After 2 games, followed by recurring lower leg injuries over the last 2 years. Jenkins has started 11, 11, and 14 games over the last 3 seasons. That seems to be trending in the right direction, but Jenkins did leave 3 additional games early last season after just 10, 13, and 19 snaps, which makes his 14 starts a bit misleading. When on the field, Jenkins, 6'6", 330-pound wrecking ball, uproots defenders in the run game and delivers crushing body blows as a finisher. He is also young enough to at least warrant a contract to compete for a starting guard spot, but there needs to be a viable option behind him on the depth chart as a safeguard against another potential injury. This sounds like a perfect guy the Patriots should be targeting. Yeah, he has some questions, but it's the perfect situation. You bring him in and you have him compete, and he wins the job. And if he has an injury, then you have Layden Robinson or Sidney So or Cole Strange to back him up. But at least you have somebody who has shown consistent competence at the NFL level at left guard on your roster. Did we not learn last year that if you get hit with injuries on the offensive line, all hell can break loose? And the Patriots right now are in the same kind of situation. And again, there's time, and hopefully they add guys. Hopefully I break news during this podcast, during this live stream, and we find out that they signed somebody. By the way, fullback Jakob Johnson is going to the Houston Texans. So there will not be a reunion for Jakob Johnson and Josh McDaniels. But bring guys in. Sign Cam Robinson. Sign Tevin Jenkins. Bring them in. Build depth on the offensive line in case you have to go through an injury again. I mean, the main priority, the number one priority of this offseason was to support Drake Maye, to protect Drake Maye, and to get Drake Maye better weapons at wide receiver. That was the number one priority. And even if you missed on your first 3, 4, 5 offensive linemen, keep going back at it. Keep going back at it. You still have money. You have a plan B if somebody gets injured. By the way, at guard, you got other names like Dylan Radunz, Dalton Risner, Shane Lemieux. And at center, you've got the guy we've talked about already, Garrett Bradbury, who is in Minnesota still. He has not been officially released, but it sounds like he's likely going to get released by the Vikings at some point. You have options. You have options. You have money. Legitimate NFL offensive linemen are available. Yes, they have questions, but I think they would be upgrades over everything you have right now. Jenkins is an upgrade at left guard. Cam Robinson is an upgrade at left tackle. He wasn't great last year, again, dealing with an injury, but before then, he was better than Vidarian Lowe. So show that urgency on the offensive side like you showed the urgency on the defensive side. All right, what if the Patriots don't get the job done over the next week or two? We'll talk draft in a minute. But first, let me jump to a super chat from Derek, $5 super chat. Thank you, Derek. Are you okay with the Pats being aggressive to move back in the first for Ariante Ursary if he is their guy? Ursary is interesting. Some people have him, falling all the way down to like the third round. I think it's more likely he's going to be drafted in the second round. Ariante Ursary is an interesting prospect. He's one of those second-round guys. I don't think anybody in this tackle class is jumping out. You've got, again, a bunch of dudes in this class that have a lot of questions surrounding them. Membu, can he play the left side? Will Campbell, the arm length. Josh Simmons, the injury. Josh Connerly, is he good enough? Ursary, is he good enough? Is Ursary going to take 2 years, 3 years to get there? Will he ever get there? But I think if you're the Patriots, you have to consider every single left tackle prospect in this draft, especially if you don't sign Cam Robinson and you don't have at least a bridge guy to get you to next year. You have to consider everybody that is a big offensive lineman that's played tackle and that you think has the chance to play left tackle. So, Derek, yes, I'd consider everything. But, if you have to move back up into the first round for Ariante Ursary, then you have to believe that he is somebody who's going to be good enough, right? That he's going to be good enough, because if you're shedding picks to move up to draft him, you best not miss. All right, speaking of the draft, there are some questions about tackles in this draft, as I just brought up, right? Will Campbell. We've talked about him. Is the arm length a big enough issue? I've said this, I'll say it again. I think you have to believe that Will Campbell is a unicorn. He has to be so unusual that he will work out in the NFL at left tackle with the shortest wingspan that we have seen for that position in the past almost 2 decades, if not longer. If you believe that Will Campbell is a unicorn, then take him at 4. But you better be right. I'm not sold he's a unicorn. I'm not sold he can play left tackle. And I know he played great at LSU. I understand. But the NFL is a different beast. And when you look at the long history of tackles, guys with his wingspan, they just don't play that position. But if he's the one, if he's the unicorn, then you make out. Then you draft him at 4. He's your left tackle for the next decade. But if he's not that unicorn, you draft him, you slide him into guard, I think that's a disaster. So that's how I feel about Will Campbell. We'll see if his arms measure differently, because there is that story how offensive linemen, especially tackles, they all measured at least a half-inch shorter at the combine than they did at the Senior Bowl and bowl games. So there's some question about the validity of that measurement at the combine, not just for Campbell, but for all of those guys. So it'll be fascinating to see as these arm measurements come in at the pro days if they change from the combine. But right now, if you're talking 32 and almost 32 and a half inches, and that wingspan, again, the wingspan is a bigger issue. The guy has to be unbelievably special to draft at 4. And if you think he's that guy, then you draft him, but you best not miss. Armand Membu. Can he play left tackle? He's played right tackle his entire college career. Now, some will tell you he played on the right side because there was already an established left tackle playing, and they didn't want to move that guy, so they just put Membu at right tackle and said, now we got 2 really good tackles. Membu was tremendous when he tested at the combine. He certainly seems like he has the athleticism to play on the left side. He also has the length to play on the left side. But what does Doug Marrone think? What does Jason Hotaling believe? How does Robert Kugler feel about it? And if you pick up the phone and call Dante Scarnecchia, does Scarnecchia believe that he can move to the left side? We've seen a lot of guys that are good on the right side. They try to move to the left side, and they don't work out well. And we went through this last year, right? Caden Wallace was drafted, Penn State right tackle. Elliott Wolf said, we think he can play the left side. That did not last. Chuks Okorafor was signed. We think he can play on the left side. Chooks did not like playing on the left side. Then he did not like playing at all. So if you believe that Membu can play left tackle, then you pick him over Campbell. I think, as great as Campbell was at LSU, Membu's got the athleticism and the length So can Membu play left tackle? Can Will Campbell play left tackle? Can the Patriots move back in the draft? That's another question, right? Was asked by Derek in the super chat whether or not I'd be aggressive to move up for Ursery. What if the Patriots move back? If you move back in the draft, then you talk about Kelvin Banks out of Texas. He's probably going to go draft, he's probably going to be drafted somewhere between like 11 and 18 in this draft. If you move back, do you draft Kelvin Banks? How about Josh Simmons, left tackle at Ohio State? Some questions about Simmons. Number one, he had a huge injury during the season, which cost him the end of the year. Now, he said at the combine that he checked out well. Reports say that he got some really good medical info at the combine. But of course, if that is Josh Simmons' agent leaking that information, then you take it for what it's worth. I don't know, right? Grain of salt. Because of course, Simmons' agent is going to come out and say, oh yeah, he got great information from the medical reporting. So, I don't know about that. Simmons seems to have a lot of talent, but he has the injury. Just destroyed his knee last year. And on top of that, the only film of Josh Simmons is against competition that's not very good. So did he look great because he faced some underwhelming competition? You don't really know the answer to that question. But he's athletic. He's a big dude. He's got good tape. But do you believe that tape is because of the competition and not necessarily a fair judgment as to how Simmons truly is at left tackle? And how does your medical team feel about his knee? Does your medical team feel differently than the medical team reportedly at the combine? I don't know. So you can move back and look at Banks. You can move back and look at Josh Simmons. Those guys have some questions. You can move up. You can move up into the second round, higher in the second round, or you can move back up into the first round. And then you're talking about guys like Josh Connerly. Is he a guy that's going to be a legitimate left tackle at the NFL level? Is he going to be able to start for you this year? Another guy you can look at is Donovan Jackson. Is Donovan Jackson a guard or is he a tackle at the NFL level? He was also at Ohio State along with Simmons. So those are some of the guys we're going to be talking about over the next several weeks. And then you also wonder, and this is something I want to dive into deeper as we move along, the Patriots are not going to keep everybody on their roster. Right? We've already seen Devon Gottschall go. We've already seen Sione Takitaki go. Jonathan Jones is gone. Dietrich Wise is gone. David Andrews has been released. The Patriots are going to be looking to move some of these veterans. And I wonder, what kind of picks can they get for some of these veterans? I would not be surprised if they try to trade Jelani Tavai. I would not be surprised if they try to trade Juwan Bentley. I would not even be surprised if they try to trade Marcus Jones because he's smaller for the nickel cornerback position. What do they get in return for those guys? Not that you can trade Jelani Tavai for a second-round pick, but if you can trade a veteran or two and let's say get a fourth or fifth-round pick, those picks become sweeteners. And now if you want to move up in, back into the first round, you have extra ammo to do it. If you want to move up from 38 to closer to the top of the second round, you want to move up a couple of slots because you targeted a guy, right? Then you could use those picks from the later rounds to move up a couple of slots in the second round. So I think there's still a lot of room to maneuver here for the Patriots. And they might just say, hey, look, we might want to trade some of these guys and get, fourth round pick, fifth round pick, and then throw some darts. And throw some darts at some of these, big tackles that are projected to maybe be good in 2 years, 3 years. And just throw some darts at guys. That's something else that they can do. So there's a lot of options. But man, oh man, they've got to nail this draft. I would love to see them sign Cam Robinson. I would, even with the questions, I'd love to see them add Tevin Jenkins. Add some legitimate NFL experience. I would add Garrett Bradbury. I would add those guys because they're legit NFL offensive linemen and they don't leave you desperate as you walk into the draft and they create competition at camp. And you got to protect Drake Maye. You can't have him go through another season like he went through last year, already concussed at least once, if not twice. You have to. You have to protect the young quarterback. So I would bring those vets in. I would go into the draft and I would see how the board falls. If Travis Hunter is sitting there at 4, I don't want to be sitting there going, oh, Travis Hunter's there at 4, but, should we draft Armand Membu or should we draft Will Campbell because we really need a tackle? No, you don't pass up on somebody like Travis Hunter. If Abdul Carter is there, you don't go, oh, well, we got Harold Landry and we got Chase on, we got Jennings, but we really need a tackle. No. So even if these guys are somewhat seen as Band-Aids, I'd still bring them in. What's the worst that can happen? Are they going to completely uproot the locker room? Like, is Cam Robinson, does Cam Robinson have enough stroke, right? Does Cam Robinson have enough stroke to completely overturn, upset a locker room? If not, then if you can get a deal done with them, then you get a deal done with them. That's what you do. I don't think Tevin Jenkins is going to be the make or break part of this offseason. But if he's healthy, he's your starting left guard for 17 games, and he's a clear upgrade over whoever you have on the roster right now. So I would be bringing in those vets, man. I'd be bringing in those vets. If we go into the draft, if we walk into the draft 5-6 weeks from now with this same offensive line situation, that to me is inexcusable. And yes, they can add later, but the guys that are going to be available later, guess what? Probably not even as good as the guys available now. There's a reason why they become available later, right? Yes, you might be able to pull off a trade, but you need that to work. You need the other team to work with you. Now you're depending on other teams. So that's what I would do. I would go out and I would sign a couple of these vets. Maybe not sign them all, but go out and sign some of these veterans. And that way, when you walk into the draft, you don't feel desperate at any offensive line positions, let alone multiple offensive line positions. Protect Drake Maye. That was the number one priority this offseason. As excited as I am about the defensive additions, and I am excited about that, the number one priority was to help Drake Maye, and they have not done nearly enough to do that yet. Still time, but they got to get moving. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to comment. Don't forget to subscribe. Again, we'll be back on Wednesday, 3 o'clock. No podcast on Friday. I'll be on vacation. If something big breaks, I'll be all over it. I appreciate every single one of you as we continue to build this channel. Everything Pats, a New England Patriots podcast. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll be talking to you soon.